Hey guys, I want you to listen into this for a quick moment. I know that you're busy, just like me. I mean, that's why you're listening to a podcast, probably on your way to work. I know how it goes. So when do you have time to actually go out and shop for clothes? Boom, in comes Bombfell. They are an easier way for men to get clothes. I had no ideas that companies like this existed, but all you do is you go to bombfell.com/fantasypros. You sign up for free, okay? Then they're going to ask you about your body, the shape of it, measurements, current style that you wear. You can set budgets that are comfortable with you. And from there, you can pick the clothes that you like, or you could do what I did. Let a stylist choose for you. That's right, you get your own stylist. I've been rocking Adidas jumpsuits forever, so I decided to let Jasmine from Bombfell help me out. Surprised my wife with a whole new outfit. She sent me a preview email, what it was to make sure I was okay with her choice. And just a day or two later, the clothes were at my door. The customer service you will receive is hands down the best part. You'll really like the way that they serve you. It just doesn't feel like that you're hassling them when you ask them for something. Because I told her something didn't really fit my style. She switched it out, had no issue doing that. When you receive your clothes, you have 7 days to tell them what you want to keep. You send the rest back absolutely free. They legitimately give you a return label. You don't even have to do anything. You don't have to go back to a store, nothing like that. You can choose new clothes, pause your order, cancel your order, anything you want. I cannot say enough good things about the VIP treatment that I received from them. So do me a favor, go to bombfell.com/fantasypros while you're at work today. Check them out. Let me know what you think. By putting in our link, which is again, bombfell.com/fantasypros, you will automatically receive $25 off your first order. Again, that is BOMB, like bomb, fell, FELL.com, Bombfell. Open and close. You see what I did there? Okay, guys, let's talk some football. What's going on, guys? Welcome into the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. I am your host, Mike Tagliere, once again riding solo as the host while Bobby hangs out with his newborn baby. But have no fear, we did what we always do, and we bring in one of the best analysts in the business, our own Dan Harris. Dan, thank you for joining us on short notice today. I know you've had a hectic day, probably a hectic week, but we're here to talk some football, so I'm sure you're pretty excited about that.
Absolutely. Frankly, no matter how long a day is or no matter how bad a week is, you can always fit in some time to talk a little fantasy sports, so let's do it.
Yes, for sure. And Dan, I think you're the perfect person because you obviously work at Fantasy Pros with us. You know Bobby and I. I forgot to mention on our last podcast, I need to call out Bobby right now. If you listen to last week's DFS show, you know that Bobby and I made a bet about who would win our play draft contest that we did. Not to brag, but I won. First place. While Bobby was far behind. I think Bobby finished in like 7th place. What that means, Dan, that means Bobby has to prance around his house in 2 days in a Bears jersey and a pair of booty shorts in front of his 2 young sons and his newborn daughter. How great is this?
It's fantastic, but he doesn't have to videotape that and make it public, does he? Because that's really not fair to the listeners or anyone else outside of his family who has to actually witness that.
I would tend to agree with that, but Bobby, if you're listening, and I know you are, I will be checking in with your wife to ensure that this happens. Regardless of what you might think, I do not actually want pictures. So just to be clear.
Yeah,
right?
and I think I can speak for the entire fantasy community and every single listener is that nobody wants pictures of that, but we need to make sure that it happens, so definitely someone reach out to his wife.
Absolutely. Otherwise, we're going to make him do something else embarrassing, like, do the combine when Amari Cooper beats Sammy Watkins this year.
Let's hope so.
He better. Anyways, today's show, guys, is on our Start-Sit episode, talking about players who are on the cusp of starting for most fantasy teams. These are the players who were littering mine and Dan's timeline throughout the week, so believe me when I say we want to talk about the most controversial players possible in order to limit these questions. Because, guys, there are so much stuff that we're working on throughout the week, and I apologize for not getting to too many of the questions on Twitter, but working on the primer as I do, it's going to be coming out Thursday, midday, as it always does. That article literally takes the life out of me. I don't know if you've seen it, Dan, but it's like 21,000 words this week.
I have seen it, and I can't imagine the amount of work that goes into it, because I do a lot of stuff all week and do everything, and I barely have time to breathe. The fact that you have time to write that article really kind of boggles my mind. So if you have not checked it out, and I'm not just saying that because I work with Mike, it is incredible. You really should. It answers basically every question you could possibly have.
Well, I appreciate that. And I don't have the time to do it. I just somehow do it in my sleep. And I had my dream last night that I had was that I was falling asleep at my computer and I died. My wife thought it was crazy. I don't know if it means something or whatever.
That might be a sign, Mike. That might be a sign, Tags, that you need to kind of, take it down a notch a little bit there. Come on.
Oh, man. Well, we need to talk about the news of the day. Obviously, the only real big news, there was two pieces of news that came out. One, that Matt Forte is likely out for a couple weeks with what is being described as a toe injury. It sounds like turf toe. They did sign Travaris Cadet, so maybe Bilal Powell gets significant work this week. The other news that came up is that Randall Cobb is being taken off the injury report, and he appears to be on track to play against the Bears on Thursday Night Football. We're going to talk about those players once we get into running backs and wide receivers, but Dan, let's start at the quarterback position. Let's start right with Ben Roethlisberger. You know, a lot of people are going to be sitting there with him on their team. We knew coming into the season that Ben struggles on the road. What do you make of this game at Baltimore? The reason I think it's so interesting, and I think it's an uncharted area in fantasy football, is that the Ravens are coming back from London. Okay, this is a game where the Ravens are actually the seventh oldest team in the National Football League. So they're an older team, right? They're coming. No team has ever played the week after coming back from London. They always get a bye week, but for whatever reason, both the Jaguars and the Ravens chose to play this week. Now, if you're the Jaguars, if they're like, Jaguars, you could either get a bye week or you could play the Jets. Of course they're going to play the Jets. So but I don't blame them. But for the Ravens to come back home and play against the Steelers, I think that's like an interesting little tidbit. What do you make of Ben Roethlisberger in Baltimore this week?
So I think the bottom line is the way I feel about Roethlisberger kind of goes against how I generally feel with my rankings. I like to feel like I'm kind of an underreactor a little bit. I take into account the matchups, of course, that they move, but I really don't move that significantly from where I have guys for the season. Obviously impacts somewhat, but this one, I don't know. I mean, I get the London travel, although we have no precedent, like you said. We don't know exactly how this is going to affect the Ravens. I've done, overseas trips, and I come back and it takes me a few days, but frankly, they were so horrifically embarrassed, and they didn't really show up, frankly, in London anyway. I'm not even sure they were there. So I am sort of operating under the assumption that it's going to be more of the classic Ravens defense that we've seen so far this year. And honestly, I moved Ben pretty far down. I have him like a low end QB2 at this point. Now that's pretty extreme, at least as far as I could tell. I mean, look, road Roethlisberger is a thing. Okay, I can't really explain it. I don't know what it is, but it is a thing. It's this thing in baseball, especially. We always talk about guys who are injury prone versus accident prone, and you're like, well, these injuries aren't indicative of future injuries that are going to happen. The guy's just accident prone. But at some point, if you keep getting injured, you are injury prone. With Ben, I don't know why this is happening every time on the road, but it is, and you have to buy into it. And frankly, his last 3 games against the Ravens, at least in Baltimore, have all been terrible. You know what I mean? He's got, 2 touchdowns overall, I think 4 or 5 interceptions. So for me, frankly, I'm not really worried about the London thing right now. I am significantly moved. I got a ton of questions on Twitter today about Ben Roethlisberger. He was never my start choice. So for me, I'm basically starting any other reasonable option over him.
I'm with you. And it's not just like a 1-year sample where we're talking about Roethlisberger on the road, guys. Over the last 3 years, Ben Roethlisberger on the road is equivalent to what Brock Osweiler was last year. And I'm not exaggerating by any means. Like, you could do the research. He's not good on the road. And so a couple of guys I'd play over him this week: Andy Dalton at Cleveland, Tyrod Taylor at Atlanta. Andy Dalton's inside my top 12 quarterbacks. I don't think I'm overreacting to this because, the Cleveland Browns are a team that I want to say they have 2 sacks through 3 games. They're not getting pressure on the quarterback without Myles Jarrett. They were missing Jamie Collins last week. Their secondary is atrocious. They have nobody to cover AJ Green. And Andy Dalton, the biggest concern about him this year is that his offensive line is putrid and they can't pass block. This is 1 week where you shouldn't have to worry about that. The Cleveland Browns, I want to say it's 23 of the last 28 games. They've allowed multiple passing touchdowns. So this goes all the way back into 2015. So the Browns have been bad for a long time. So Andy Dalton's in the starting conversation. Tyrod Taylor's there. Another name I wanted to talk to you about, Dan, Jameis Winston versus the New York Jets. Would you start him over someone like Ben Roethlisberger, or do you put both Dalton and Tyrod Taylor over both of them?
First, he's against the Giants. You said the Jets. I know you meant the Giants. If he was against the Jets, he might be the top quarterback of the week. Yeah, of course. The Giants are not a great matchup. I certainly have him over Roethlisberger. Like I said, I legitimately, every single guy you mentioned. I mean, we're talking, as of right now, my preliminary rankings, I haven't finalized it. I have Case Keenum over Ben Roethlisberger right now. I'm just not starting that guy no matter what. I don't know if I'll end up there, but that's where I am right now. For Winston, yeah, I mean, I am starting him. I mean, I think that he's certainly an option that you could stream someone over like Dalton for sure, like Taylor. he's played okay. He had a rough game, last week, but he was obviously playing from behind the whole time. But his accuracy has improved. He's using all of his weapons, with Evans and Deshaun Jackson, but he's also going to Brate and even Adam Humphries. I'm not overly confident in this game, but I don't really. I think Jacquizz Rodgers will be fine, but obviously their run game isn't quite as strong as it usually would be once Doug Martin gets back. So I'm not really expecting them to be able to have a huge running effort. I don't see really a negative game script or anything like that. But at the same time, despite the strong secondary, I have faith enough in Jameis. I don't think this is, like I said, I'm an underreactor. I have Jameis usually around a borderline startable quarterback, and that's basically how I have him here. So, probably a high-end QB2, maybe a low-end QB1. But my guess is I'm a little higher on him than you, Mike. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. You're higher on than me. I don't like to start quarterbacks against the Giants. And I know that this is a Tampa Bay game at home, but if you go and look at it, 14 of the last 19 quarterbacks who have played against the Giants have totaled fewer than 16 fantasy points. Just one quarterback has totaled 18 points. So, and that's going back all the way to the start of last year. So the Giants are no joke. This is a team that's like in win or die mode. They might be already dead. They're 0-3. The season might be over for them, but at the same time, there's something to be said for a team that is fighting for their last chance at potentially saving their season. And it's weird to say because this defense was just so good and the offense was just, they were brutal through the first two games. They didn't really come on till the second half of last week. So I'm not feeling comfortable there. One quarterback that, before we move on to the running back position, what do you do with Cam Newton?
Drop him. He basically is certainly somebody who, at this point, I legitimately think is droppable for a season-long league. I'm really sort of struggling whether or not he's 24th in passing yards. My rule of thumb is if you look horrible against the Saints, you pretty much are basically a borderline startable. I might start him over.
Yeah, the Saints weren't even at full strength. They were missing, I think, three of their top DBs in that game.
And what did he throw? 3 interceptions, I believe. So, look, he's never been an accurate guy, right? He's never been this guy that's going to light the world on fire with his passing ability. What he is a big guy. He gets a lot of value from his, ability to score touchdowns and his rushing ability. And to the extent that comes back, great. You know what I mean? He'll be fine. But the bottom line is I'm really not convinced it is going to come back. They obviously want to protect him a little bit. His weapons are dropping like flies. You know what I mean? There's no Greg Olsen. I think Kelvin Benjamin was at practice, but just stretching today. So, my guess is he's doubtful to play. So the Pats are going to probably sit there and say, what's the best weapon? I guess it's Christian McCaffrey. The cornerbacks can take Funchess, who's basically the equivalent of a tight end at this point. So for me, look, he's like a low end QB2. He's like in the Roethlisberger discussion.
Yeah, no, it's one, if you want to take a shot in DFS tournaments this week, he's going to be extremely low owned, which I'm okay with. But in season long leagues, you don't need to take that chance, because the reason I'll say this, the people out there, I've seen so many people this weekend defending Cam Newton and saying that it must be a shoulder, there must be something bothering him. This is who Cam Newton has always been, guys. Like, seriously, you've all turned a blind eye because he's been able to run the ball and put up fantasy points. You didn't decide to look at his actual numbers. He's completed 61.4% of passes this year. That is the second highest mark in his career. He's completed 6.8 yards per attempt. That is right in line with his season averages that he's had before. His touchdown percentage is a little bit low, but he's also played against some really, really bad defenses. His schedule to start the season was immaculate. The 49ers, the Bills, and then last week the Saints. A Saints team that was like 75% of their defense that was already bad to begin with. Cam Newton is not a very good quarterback. And, again, I think he's a fair guy to play in DFS this week because the Patriots are going to put points on the board. And they may just say, you know what, Cam, we're going to live with it. We're going to take the chance of you running the football. Get out there and do your thing, man. Because if he runs the ball, he could rush for 2 touchdowns. And that's why he has appeal in DFS to me. But outside of that, Cam Newton, I'm with you. I think that you can consider dropping him. But let's go to running backs. I want to make sure we hit on quite a few running backs this week. And let's start with Bilal Powell. That's the one that I'm moving up, and I have him at number 24 now in my rankings. I'm feeling pretty confident about it because Matt Forte is missing this game. Elijah McGuire, who he fumbled last week, so he found his way to the bench. Travaris Cadet was just signed this week. So they really don't have another running back. And if you go back to last year, over the final 4 weeks of the season, when Matt Forte was out for one of those games, and then he was limited in the other 3, Bilal Powell was the number 2 running back behind just Le'Veon Bell. So can we confidently start Bilal Powell this week?
Yeah, you can. I'm a Jets fan, obviously. Not that really goes into it. But I agree. I was pretty high on Powell in the preseason, and obviously Forte's usage really cut into it. But for me this week, yeah, I think he's probably a low end RB2. You know what I mean? I'm not going out there and getting that excited about a Jets team that's going against Jacksonville, who obviously look like world beaters in a couple of their games so far this year. But for sure, he's going to get the large majority of the volume, and he's talented. I mean, I think Forte's looked a little better than him, frankly, for most of the season, but he did show it last year. I do think as the primary ball carrier, he's going to be involved. He's obviously good at catching passes out of the backfield. So I definitely see him as somebody, I don't think his ceiling is particularly high in this one, unless Jacksonville is literally still on London time. But I do think that he's got a pretty decent floor with how much playing time he's going to get, his snap count. So I would view him as kind of a low-end RB2 this week.
Yep, that's exactly where I'm at with them. If there's one part of the Jaguars defense that's had some bend to it, it's been the run defense. They've allowed 4.8 yards per carry, and they've played some mediocre run games. I mean, the Titans were obviously solid, but outside of that, it wasn't like it's not like they played like top run games every single week. So I like Paul this week, and I'm starting to come around on him. He's gonna fill up those sit-start questions. I know it already, just because he's hurt a lot of people. A lot of people have been asking me if they drop him, and I've really had no issue with that, with the way that they were going. But as of right now, it's hard to see McGuire getting like big snaps after fumbling last week. So one player that I think people are going to be talking about him, or do I go with someone like Chris Thompson at Kansas City? Obviously, Chris Thompson is a top 5 running back in football right now, and it's tough to bench him in any situation, but would you play someone like Bilal Powell over Chris Thompson right now, who is, honestly, it seems like he might be capped at that 9 touches per game, and I've compared this to a Tevin Coleman type situation. He plays in a less high-scoring offense, but seeing 9 touches a game, it's hard for any running back to remain fantasy relevant every single week. He needs to score a touchdown essentially every single week, and that's going to be tough to do against the Kansas City defense in Kansas City. So what's your take on Thompson? And if you had Bilal, Powell, and Thompson, who would you be playing?
Yeah, I'm pretty much exactly with you. I would play Powell this week. Look, I get it. And Thompson has been really incredible, but I'm just not somebody who's going to bank on 60-yard touchdowns every week. I just, obviously that's not, unless you're Kareem Hunt, in which case you basically write it down every week. But really, it's not something where I'm going into this wanting to take a guy who's just, like you said, not seeing that many touches. Now, he did have 14 touches last week, right? So if he's going to get that amount of involvement, then I might change, but I don't really see that going forward. I mean, he's a little guy. They really don't want him to take too much abuse. So I agree. And in Arrowhead, it's Monday night, I believe, too, right? I mean, that place is incredibly difficult for opponents to play in on a good day. If you're talking about a nationally televised game on Monday night with the way they're playing, I think that defense is going to be pretty ferocious. And frankly, at some point, the book is out on Thompson, right? I mean, if he's in the game, you know what I mean? There is going to be basically a focus on him whenever he's in there to stop him. So for me, I like Thompson. I probably maybe have him as, probably a high-end RB3, maybe a low, right on the border of RB2, RB3. But for me, I'm starting Powell. I know it sounds weird, right? It sounds weird to start a guy who's basically been fantasy irrelevant completely for this year over a guy who's been one of the top running backs in the league. But that's what we do, right. we sort of analyze the game matchup. So for me, definitely, I'm not really hesitating starting Powell over Thompson in a standard league.
I'm with you. I think Thompson still should be probably started in a majority of PPR leagues, but at the same time, Kansas City, you mentioned at Arrowhead Stadium, last year they allowed just 16 points per game there. It was the 5th best in the NFL at home. So Chris Thompson, dial back expectations for a week, guys. I know that everybody wants to play him after the way he's been putting up numbers, but one player that put up numbers last week, and it's become kind of a conversation, and I'm torn because I've had my heart broken by him before, and this is a conversation between Isaiah Crowell and Duke Johnson. I'm not an Isaiah Crowell fan. I think he's a type of running back who gets what is blocked. And I understood why people were drafting him where they were this offseason. Hugh Jackson has fallen in love with Crowell. They wanted to extend him. They gave him a high tender. But they built the offensive line. It's not blocking to the point where I think that they felt it would. The continuity just hasn't quite been there yet. But at the same time, Crowell has done nothing to further his role in this offense. And Duke Johnson, on the other hand, the guy that has broken my heart before, he looks fantastic. It's funny. I was watching some clips of him just actually yesterday. I showed my wife just so she could see. I'm like, look at this kid. Like, why is he not running the ball more often? And like, it's just, I asked these questions in a game against Cincinnati. I don't think that game script is going to be in Isaiah Crowell's favor. So if you're looking at it, let's pretend you're in a PPR league. Would you start Duke Johnson over Isaiah Crowell this week with Vontaze Burfict coming back for Cincinnati?
And let me just very quickly look at my rankings because I'm pretty sure as of right now, yes, I do have Duke Johnson ahead of Isaiah Crowell in PPR leagues. I think I still, probably because I'm stubborn and a dope, I still have Crowell slightly ahead of Duke Johnson for this week in standard leagues. And look, I have been incredibly disappointed by Crowell as well. I was not a fan coming into the season, and I sort of kind of reluctantly bought into it. Mike, I don't know if you have this. We all have the same data to analyze, right? And determine who we like and who we don't. But we all rank differently because we have either feelings or instincts or something like that about the way something's going to go. I did not like Crowell. I felt like I kind of came around to him reluctantly at the very end, and I have several shares of him, and it's just been bad. And I agree. I kind of thought he would be the product of the offensive line, and the offensive line just is not as good as kind of I expected it to be. Now, he's had a few tough matchups, obviously, with the Steelers and the Ravens, but he didn't do much against the Colts. And like you said, game script almost never favors him. And again, last year he caught 40 passes.
Yes.
So that was something where I was sort of like, okay, well, even if the game script does not favor him, at least he's going to be in. But basically, the second they fall behind, they go to Duke Johnson. And to be fair, as you mentioned, Duke Johnson looks awesome. You know, he is really sort of taken this role and gotten it. And he's second. Duke Johnson is second, I think, on the team in terms of routes run. So I really think that he's going to be involved. And like you said, the Bengals are, generally speaking, this year tough against the run. You know, their defense has been okay, whatever, but I think they're only allowing 3.5 yards per carry. And like you said, Burfict is coming back. So again, Johnson is a little bit more getting some value out of the big plays. Like his touchdown run last week came from 30 yards out or whatever it is. So you can't rely on that. But as a whole, he's obviously going to be involved in the passing game. It is going to be a negative game script almost certainly. So certainly in PPR, Johnson for me is an easy call over Crowell. Even sitting here, I can't exactly explain why. I have Crowell slightly ahead of Johnson right now in standard leagues.
It's fair. But you know what? The only thing I took away from what you just said, you're a roots guy instead of a route.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry about that. Look, I mean, I think that's how we say it in New York where I'm from. All right. So cut me some slack.
This was a thing on Twitter a couple of days ago where it was like, do you say pass routes or you say pass routes? I was like, who the hell says roots?
I say roots, tags, and if you want me back on this podcast, you are going to allow me to say it that way.
Well, then you can call me Tugs. All right.
No, it's tags, man. Tags.
Tags. Yeah. I'm Johnny Taves. All right. So I instead, this may not be a sit-start question for some people, but I'm sure there's some people out there who are wondering this, that they may have, let's say that they drafted DeMarco Murray, not based on what I told them, because I told them to stay away. But let's say they did. And I had a lot of people that have said they went out there and they got Derrick Henry. So now they have both the two. They don't know who to start every single week. What do you do if you own both DeMarco Murray and Derrick Henry? What do you do with them right now? Not even talking about necessarily starting, because I think you have to start DeMarco Murray when he's on the field, just because he's going to get the first shot every single week. But do you sell one? And if so, which one?
I mean, I think if you have the room, I would probably just keep both and hope for a Murray injury. Not that you ever root for somebody to get injured or something like that. But, you know, I agree with you. I was completely off Murray in this preseason. And frankly, last week just made me mad as an analyst, right? Like, you cannot have do nothing in your first two games, have a hamstring injury, be a game time decision, and then destroy the Seattle defense. That is not fair to fantasy analysts, and I am waiting for my DeMarco Murray apology. Anyway, going forward, look, you're right. In terms of start state, you're right. You have to start Murray right now, as you said. Long term, I prefer Henry for the rest of the season. I think at some point, whether it be injury or ineffectiveness, Henry is a better runner right now. Okay, he just is at this stage of his career. So I think long term, he's going to get it. So in that, look, if you stack that running back, I would feel fine, especially after this week's performance, to sell Murray, because I do feel pretty strongly that eventually this is going to be Henry's backfield. If at worst, this split that we've got going on right now is going to be reversed, where Henry's going to be the main guy. So personally, I'd probably hold both if I could and sort of hopefully lock up that spot. But if I am going to trade one, as long as I have the depth to survive right now, because Henry's not a great start on a week-to-week basis right now,
right,
I would look to trade Murray and hold Henry for the long term.
I'm with you 100%. I would trade Murray, and I would sell high after the week he just had. You know, he had a solid game, but a lot of it came on one play. But at the same time, that happens. That's part of football, right? We have to account for that stuff. But I'm with you in that DeMarco Murray, here's what's going to happen. Every single week, he's going to go out there and he's going to have Derrick Henry on his toes. Whereas if DeMarco Murray struggles at all, they will not be afraid to put Derrick Henry in the game, and they'll ride the hot hand, and it's going to be a mess to deal with. Derrick Henry is a lot cheaper than DeMarco Murray, which is why I prefer him, but it's really a mess right now, and I wouldn't prefer to have Murray, so I would try and sell high on him. Here's one backfield that suffered. We talked about in our last show that Darren Sproles tore his ACL, broke his arm on the same play. Poor guy. But we do have to dissect what's happening in this backfield. Wendell Smallwood, LeGarrette Blount. A lot of people are automatically assuming that it's LeGarrette Blount after the touchdowns last week. I get it. But Wendell Smallwood, for those who don't know, played double the snaps of what LeGarrette Blount did last week when Sproles went down. They're playing at the Chargers this week. What is your take on this backfield? Do you have a strong feeling on whether you'd want Smallwood, Blount, or do you just want to avoid the situation altogether?
I think in the immediate, future, I'm probably avoiding it. I'm certainly not going out there, and I don't want to start LeGarrette Blount or Wendell Smallwood this week. But you cannot rely on LeGarrette Blount. It's clear Doug Peterson is not like, yeah, LeGarrette Blount's my guy. You know what I mean? He got 14 carries, no carries, and then 12 carries. We have absolutely no idea what to make of it. And you're right. He played just 22 of the 76 snaps last week. So he really wasn't exactly getting it all done. I like Smallwood. I liked him this preseason. I really thought that he was going to have a bigger role coming out. He hasn't yet. I do think he's talented. I do think eventually he is going to make his way into like the borderline RB2 conversation once he gets kind of going. Blunt's going to be there. He's going to be the goal line guy there, so it's there. But again, Peterson already is talking about, I like the 3-back rotation, so let's get, Corey Clement in there, which is fine, and he scored a touchdown last week. But honestly, for this week, I'm certainly avoiding, probably in the near future I'm avoiding. I do personally expect that Smallwood is a guy that eventually is going to take really the lion's share of the load there, and I think he's going to be valuable. I don't really see him becoming this reliable. Wendell Smallwood's carrying me to a championship, but I definitely think he's going to be a guy who's going to be this borderline RB2 every week, maybe a flex, so I think he'll be fine in the long term.
Yeah, and he's more involved in the passing game, and that's why I prefer him. LeGarrette Blount offers exactly 0 in the passing game. I know he caught a touchdown this year and all that, but I don't care. LeGarrette Blount is so bad. I'm not a Blount fan. I wasn't a fan coming in, so I stand by that. I don't want any piece of that backfield, though, to be honest with you. I think it's going to be a mess going forward. If I had to pick one, it would be Smallwood, but I just think it's going to be so inconsistent. That offensive line was a bit overrated by some, I think, coming into the year. I just don't see it from that Eagles offense. I just can't believe in it. One player I also have trouble believing in, told people not to start him last week, but this week I'm teetering, and that is Chris Johnson. Chris Johnson, Bruce Arians came out after the game and said that Chris Johnson's still going to get his shots against the 49ers, which is obviously a matchup that we want to target. But here's my question. Andre Ellington, okay, this is a guy, effectiveness was never his problem. It was always remaining healthy. Whenever he got the big workload, he could just never stay healthy. He got nicked up all the time. So why not give it to Andre Ellington and let's see what he can do? I think he comes with the highest ceiling in this offense with limited pass catchers because, they got J.J. Nelson, who seems to be nicked up, John Brown, John Brown, I want to see you back in the field, man. But they just have limited options in the passing game while they're missing David Johnson. So why not lean more towards Andre Ellington? Would you trust Chris Johnson this week?
I think trust is probably a little too strong of a word. But I'd start him this week. Look, Ellington, I agree. He's obviously kind of dynamic in the pass catching role when he gets a little bit of space. But, they want to be careful with him, as you basically said. I don't think they're going to give him a huge role. I don't expect this to be the type of negative game script game, you know what I mean, that they're going to need to basically be throwing the ball. I think they would like to lean on Chris Johnson if they possibly can. But eventually they're going to need something. You probably can throw to Larry Fitzgerald every single play as they did on Monday, but they lost the game. So they do need somebody else who's reliable. And it's clear that Jaron Brown and JJ Nelson are not really the exactly reliable thing. So look, if I were the coach, I would probably get Ellington involved more. But for this week in particular, given the fact that it's the 49ers, I am a little worried, not too much, of the fact that they are on 10 days rest and the Cardinals are on short rest. It's a little concerning to me. But in the end, look, I'd probably have, if I check my rankings, I think he's somewhere in like 33rd, Chris Johnson, which is probably as high as he's ever going to get at this point. But I would let him start maybe as a flex this week or an RB3 with that and kind of hold my nose at it. But I'd let him go.
That's a good call. All right, so before we get into wide receivers, I do want to let you guys know, if you haven't checked out Pristine Auction yet, you guys have heard it on the show before, what the heck are you waiting for? It is like the McDonald's for adults. This is Pristine auction.com. They have daily auctions for whatever your team is. Doesn't matter if for whatever reason you're a Packers fan, you're playing my Bears this Thursday. And as a matter of fact, I actually do need a Packers helmet to add to my collection, but I've lost countless auctions on an Aaron Rodgers one. I may need to settle for Brett Favre. Yes, they have the legends too. They don't just have, the current players, they have former players as well. And so, it's really not as expensive as you think. Believe me, my wife wouldn't allow me to do it if it was. For my birthday the other week, she told me to go ahead and bid on a helmet or two. It's free to register. Go ahead and look around. You only pay for an item if you win. Just do one favor. When you register, let them know that Fantasy Pros sent you. That way we can keep doing the giveaways that we are right now. We're giving away a Mike Evans signed jersey. To enter that contest, all you have to do, guys, it's so simple. Go to iTunes, leave a review, screenshot it on your phone, on your computer, whatever you have to do. Send that into contest@fantasypros.com. This literally takes you 2 minutes. And if you do that for us, we are going to enter you into all future contests. And if you haven't heard, we've given away like Odell Beckham, David Johnson, Amari Cooper, Melvin Gordon jerseys, like jerseys galore. Like every other week we have a new jersey to give away. So go ahead and do that. Get in on that. You're automatically entered going forward. PristineAuction.com will really bring the kid out in you. All right, so let's get back to some of this sit-start talk, and I'm starting it right off a wide receiver with Terrell Pryor. I think that if we were to talk about players who have disappointed, players who have, not shown up at all, Terrell Pryor is atop that list. You talked about Isaiah Crowell is someone that you kind of bought into. Terrell Pryor, when I started the offseason, he was like the number 26 wide receiver when he got signed by the Redskins. I was like, not high on him, not low on him, just kind of just like, I don't know. I don't feel it. And I kind of started buying into what people were selling on him and the fact that there were so many injuries in this offense that targets had to go somewhere, right? Terrell Pryor looks like a guy that's never played the wide receiver position. He's not tracking balls. He's not getting separation. His routes have nothing sharp to them right now. I don't know what happened, but nothing is showing up from what he was looking at in training camp. These highlight little reels that he had from practice going over DBs, catching it one-handed. He can't even catch the ball with two hands this year. So Terrell Pryor against Kansas City. What are we doing with him here, Dan? I mean, he lines up at left wide receiver a lot of the time, which means he's going to see Terrence Mitchell in coverage a lot. Terrence Mitchell has been burned countless times this year already, so he's going to see him about 60 to 70% of the time, whereas Marcus Peters, their top corner in Kansas City, he's not going to see him very often, maybe 20, 25% of the time. Do we give Terrell Pryor one more chance, or do we say, you know what, Terrell, you have to prove it before you get back into my lineup, and I'm not starting you?
Well, first of all, I echo everything you said, other than, if I'm being completely honest, I was not reluctantly in on Pryor. I was one of the guys who said those targets got to go somewhere. He really impressed me last year, so I really am shocked by this. I was definitely in on him. Look, first of all, for this week, I have him kind of as like a mid-range wide receiver 3. So to that extent, I guess I'm advocating starting him, but this is a mess. And I tell you, of everything that worries me about this, he does look terrible. He's dropping passes. He only has 8 targets in 2 games, obviously, and that was without Jordan Reed. You know what I mean? So obviously that's terrible. The biggest thing that worries me is the Redskins offense looks really, really good. And when you look really, really good, when you're not at all targeting Terrell Pryor, why are you suddenly going to start giving Terrell Pryor all these targets, right? Like, what is the point in doing that? I don't really see that as happening. So for me, the matchup, as you said, isn't terrible. Although, again, Chiefs at home anywhere is pretty bad. So for me, I have him like a mid-range wide receiver 3. If he does nothing again, Tags, I really think he's just got to be moved out of every starting lineup. And this is really just a reluctant start at this point.
Yeah, and I think that let's clarify here. So I'm 100% in agreement with you. I think we have the same concerns here with Pryor. I think we also have concerns about the matchup here against Kansas City in Kansas City on Monday night. But if you're looking at him versus someone like, Devin Funchess or a JJ Nelson, guys like that, I probably would go Pryor just because this is a guy that they're probably going to give every last opportunity before kind of moving on. It's weird because we've heard Jay Gruden talk about, Josh Doxson. He hasn't really done much for us since he came here. What the hell has Terrell Pryor
Right.
done? You know what I mean? Like Josh Doxson has had more production than Terrell Pryor on 9 targets in his Redskins career. I stand by my statement that Josh Doxson is the best wide receiver in this team. And, his snap count has been going up every single week. So Terrell Pryor may start losing significant snaps. And it's just funny. They ended up signing him to only a 1-year deal. People wondered about that. He's 28 years old. He'll be 29, I think, in June. So, he's not a young guy, and eventually those freak athletic traits are going to start leaving you. So, it's kind of like now or never for me with Terrell Pryor. it's opposite of Amari Cooper, right? And I talk about this, and I'm just gonna say it right now. And I know people know that I love Amari Cooper. I will jump on someone if they're playing like crap, and Amari is, but he is in a way that's different than Terrell Pryor. And I say that because people would love to have the problems that Amari Cooper does. He gets open at will. He can beat any DB one-on-one. He can do it all day long. The problem is his hands right now. He's dropped 6 of 21 targets. He's 23 years old. He's had drop problems in the past. In his rookie season, he dropped the most passes in the NFL. Last year, he fixed it, and it appears to be a problem again this year. This is a mental thing. They need to get it under lockdown, but a lot of wide receivers can't get open at will the way that Amari Cooper does. So I'm not giving up on him. I'm actually buying him if you could do it for really cheap. This week at Denver is not the greatest matchup, but I wanted to throw that out there because don't give up on Amari Cooper yet, guys. And don't just look at stats. Like if you actually watch this kid on tape, one of the best wide receivers in the game. I'm not just saying that. There's a reason that I like him. Some people are like, oh, you're just saying that because Amari Cooper's your boy. Why do you think he is my boy? Because I watch so much dang football and I take in so much that it's when I come across someone like this and I'm so impressed by him, it's frustrating. Of course, give him time. But one player that we may want to give some time on our bench is Willie Snead. He's returning from his 3-game suspension this week, and this game is in London. Sean Payton said, we're going to kind of see how he comes along. He's refusing to commit to anything. He's not saying that Willie Snead's going to be out there for a full complement of snaps. He's not saying that he's going to be out there at all. How do we treat Willie Snead this week?
Personally, I'm not starting him in any league. I liked Snead a lot. I was really bummed when he got suspended because I really thought this was going to be a big year for him. And it could still be, obviously, going forward. He's only missed 3 games. But, with Peyton's comments, I don't know, man. I don't like the unknown, okay? I don't like not knowing what's going on with the coach's head. My guess is he's going to play. My guess is he's probably going to have a decent game. But my guess is also that I've probably got 3 wide receivers on my roster that I'm willing to start over him at this point. Going forward, I think he'll be a pretty solid wide receiver 3. But for right now, I don't think they're really going to need that much to beat Miami. I could be wrong, obviously. Maybe I'm biased by the way they looked against the Jets last week. But I really don't think they're going to need to throw the ball like crazy and stuff like that. And frankly, Brandon Coleman has been fine. Coby Fleener has been fine. For this first game, I would take a wait-and-see approach. I'm not really worried long-term, personally. I do think he's going to be wide receiver 3. I'd buy him at that value, but for this week, he's staying on my bench.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'll definitely take the wait-and-see. You guys have been without him for 3 weeks. You could go one more. Trust me, you'll be okay. And it'll be a good thing if he goes off, because then you'll be like, okay, I can put him back in my lineup. One player, so let's compare these two. Terrell Pryor or Pierre Garçon, who is going against Patrick Peterson this week, who has legitimately shut down wide receivers this year.
First of all, I will put it out there that Pierre Garçon was basically, you have a couple of your guys. Mike, we both loved Amari Cooper, obviously. Amari Cooper, everyone in the world who's ever listened to this podcast know that Amari Cooper is your guy. I loved him too, but Pierre Garçon was definitely one of my guys coming in. I really loved him. I bought into the Kyle Shanahan offense, everything like that, and obviously he had a huge game. For this week, I mean, he's legitimately back-to-back with Terrell Pryor in my rankings, and I have him 1 spot ahead. So it faced between the two, I would start him. I mean, he's seen 25 targets in 3 games. You know what I mean? That number alone, I get that the matchup is bad against Patrick Peterson, but I mean, frankly, the Arizona pass defense hasn't been that great this year. They're in the middle of the pack so far. Opposing teams are throwing against them. They're 32 pass attempts per game. So for me, I wouldn't be expecting a huge performance from Garçon in the matchup. But, with the amount of targets he's seeing, I definitely feel at least slightly that he's slightly more reliable at this point than Terrell Pryor.
Well, Arizona, I do want to state this. Arizona, going back to last year, they started struggling towards the end of last year, and I think it has to do with Tyrann Mathieu not being the player that he once was.
He looks awful, by the way. Like, no joke. He really does not look anything close to what he was in the past.
Yeah, no, it's weird. And like, if you go, there was a breaking point. So the Arizona Cardinals over their first, I think 11. Here's a stat I have. They allowed 15 passing touchdowns in their last 6 games of 2016, and then now they've allowed 6 passing touchdowns through the first 3 games. So now we're looking at a 9-game sample where they've allowed 21 touchdowns. That's not very good for an Arizona team that used to be legitimately one you would avoid in fantasy. But at the same time, I just feel like the 49ers don't have any other options outside of Pierre Garçon. So if they just want Patrick Peterson to follow him around, that their pass game has zero, like nothing. I mean, Marquise Goodwin, are you going to throw to him? I mean, he'll match up with Justin Bethel. So if you want to take a shot there, I mean, I guess, but it's not something that you want to trust. So I have my concerns about him this week. One player I would start, I am convinced that this is 1 week where you should start him, is Tyrell Williams against the Eagles. We saw Jalen Mills get used and abused by Odell Beckham last week. Jalen Mills is just not a good cornerback, guys. And like, for whatever reason, the Eagles felt like he should shadow Odell Beckham last week. I don't get it. Keenan Allen had a great matchup last week. Got 9 targets, posted mediocre results, but Tyrell Williams, I think that Travis Benjamin has kind of been getting going. I think Travis Benjamin only has 5 fewer fantasy points than Keenan Allen right now, but Tyrell Williams is the one who's been getting targets, just nothing has popped off the page. The Eagles stopped the run extremely well, but Tyrell Williams is someone I do like. Is there someone that you like in this wide receiver 3 range that you're willing to take a shot on that maybe sometimes you wouldn't necessarily?
Yeah, I think so. Let me just make sure so I don't overspeak. So if people check my rankings, they're not like, what are you talking about? You don't have him as a wide receiver 3. Let me just double check. Okay, so I'm going to, so this one, it's probably a little bit, aggressive. And right now he falls just outside my wide receiver 3 range, but I'm pretty high this week on Sterling Shepard. Look, the Giants offensive line, gives me nightmares, frankly, just to think about it. But obviously we saw what happens when Odell Beckham plays, right? It just is going to open up the passing game. And really the reason why I'm kind of, in on Shepard a little bit this week is the Bucs are just, I mean, I don't know who's left to play defense for them right now. I mean, they're going to be down Levante David, probably Brent Grimes, Quan Alexander. I don't know if Noah Spence is going to play. It's just
Gerald
who is
McCoy.
Going. Right, exactly. Who exactly is going to be on defense this game? And Shepard has seen a lot of targets. I know sort of Marshall I think he had more receptions and more targets than Shepard. But I mean, if you've watched Brandon Marshall this year, he's done.
He's
right?
done.
And I also was a guy who thought that Marshall would be fine. So just wanted full disclosure. Like I really did not expect him to be done. He's done. So I really do think that, given how banged up the Tampa Bay defense is, I kind of feeling like a Shepard game. I'm not, the touchdown last week was, crazy. You're not going to buy into that, obviously. But I do think he's getting a lot of targets. I do think he's going to be involved. And the fact that the Bucs defense is so beat up, I kind of am expecting him to finish basically in the wide receiver 3 range.
You know what? If Brent Grimes actually plays this game, I upgrade Shepard because Robert McClain would go back into the slot, and that would be great news for Shepard. So on 11 targets this year in coverage, McClain has allowed 8 catches for 87 yards and a touchdown. So I do think this is a good matchup for Shepard. The run game obviously is doing nothing for the Giants. At some point, it's got to, right? Like at some point, they're going to rush for 100 yards, and you're going to be like, damn.
I don't know, man. Well, I do want to say this, like legitimately, Mike, tell me what you think about Paul Perkins because I am looking at that guy, and I mean, I get that there's nothing blocked for him, but legitimately he looks like there is nothing there for him to do ever. Like, and I mean, you put Orleans Darkwing there and you're like, wow, that's a pretty bad running back, right? That's not really going anywhere, but he's like miles ahead of where Paul Perkins was. So I don't really know if the Giants are going to be able to get their running game going at all.
Yep. And I'm transparent on this too. I was telling people that Paul Perkins was a workhorse running back that you can get in like the 7th round, and I was all over it. I liked Paul Perkins, and he's proved me wrong. He looks awful. And yeah, sure, the Giants line looks bad, but he's not creating anything for himself. And if he's not going to create anything for himself, he's not going to do anything because this is not an offense you could do that. I don't know if they have a running back on the roster who can. I'm surprised that they haven't even tried to give Wayne Gallman some shots because he's a guy who can also catch some passes out of the backfield. I liked Gallman as a prospect, so it'd be interesting if they decided, you know what, let's just see what we have in the kid, because otherwise they need to invest in the position. If they don't feel like they have anything in Gallman. In running backs, that's the one position where the age doesn't really matter. If he's a rookie, throw him into the fire. We've seen Kareem Hunt. We've seen Ezekiel Elliott, Leonard Fournette. Look at all these guys. Dalvin Cook. They're all succeeding. Just put him in the game, see what you have. And if not, then you need to draft a running back next year or at least sign one in free agency, something.
It certainly can't get any worse, right? I mean, that's sort of what I'm saying. Like, legitimately, I watched Perkins, and I agree. I mean, I wasn't on him or anything in the preseason, but I think was more optimistic.
He's a volume play.
People.
He was a volume play. Why not, right?
I mean, he looks it's like he has this look where I'm like, I don't understand how you could be an NFL player right now. And I've seen him before. He obviously, has
some skill, obviously. But right now, I agree. I would just be like, look, what's the worst case if you put in Gallman? Like, I mean, how could he be worse than what you're dealing with right now? So we're in agreement on that one.
Agree. All right, let's move on to tight ends. We're running out of time here. Is there a tight end on your board that you're kind of looking at? Because me, it's Martellus Bennett. Okay, I know that him and Aaron Rodgers have not clicked yet. I get that. But guys, if you look at the landscape of tight ends right now, it's a disaster. There is really not there's not too many tight ends outside of maybe Rob Gronkowski and Zach Ertz. I mean, is there another tight end who's producing consistently?
No, not even Kelsey, right? He had 1 yard last week or something like that. No, I agree.
Kelsey in the first week, 5 catches, 40 yards. Last week, 1 catch for 1 yard, I think it was, or 6 yards. I can't remember. Like, it's been so bad. So what do we make here? Like, Martellus Bennett has just as high as upside as Gronk does in any given week, right? Like with Aaron Rodgers thrown into him.
Well, I'm not sure if I'd say as much upside as Gronk. I don't think any tight end on the planet or maybe ever has had as much upside as Gronk. But I would say I don't get this with Martellus Bennett. He has 21 targets, man. I mean, how are you not producing with 21 targets from Aaron Rodgers? I don't get it. It sounds like Cobb's going to play tomorrow. Not that really impacts, other than it takes up some targets. But look, I mean, of everything, we're all just sort of I do a trade chart as we talked about, and basically it's like Gronk and then Kelsey and then a couple of guys at top, and then everybody has the same value because it's all exactly the same. You know what I mean? It's basically play the matchups. And frankly, a guy playing in an Aaron Rodgers-led offense who's getting that many targets, you think has to produce at some point. You know what I mean? I'm not sure it's going to be this week. The problem is, I don't know when it's going to be. But in the end, he's just one of a number of streaming tight ends that I'm more optimistic that he's going to produce long term. But right now, I don't know, Mike. It's pretty frustrating.
No, I'm with you. The 21 targets, it ranks third among tight ends. That's a pace of 112 targets, guys. Like, right. So there have been just 2 tight ends over the last 5 years who have seen more than 100 targets and finished outside the top 12 producers at tight end. So, but this is how bad it is, though. This is why I am not giving up on him, because I'm okay with trotting him out there, getting his 4 points or whatever it is he's getting a week. Because if you look at the top 10 tight ends right now, Austin Hooper, who had 1 88-yard touchdown, is a top 10 tight end. So if you have scored 20 points through 3 weeks as a tight end, you're top 10. Like, that's stupid. That's basically if you catch an 8-yard touchdown in each week, you're a top 10 tight end.
Yeah, it's a disastrous position. One guy who I do want to mention, who I kind of feel like I don't feel like that many people have been talking about him all year, has been Jared Cook. And maybe people are talking about him and just not really realizing it and stuff like that. But he's pretty much been solid all season. Even last week when the Raiders offense looked like perhaps the most disastrous thing that has ever walked on the face of the earth, he still got 43 yards and a touchdown, And even this week against Denver, I think I like him a little bit more in the industry, because Denver's obviously great against the wide receivers. So Amari Cooper and Crabtree, if he plays, might be a little bit, but they're kind of mediocre against tight ends. You know what I mean? They've been allowing 16 points per game in PPR. So for me, Cook is a guy who I'm kind of hoping can continue his trajectory to become more than just a streaming play and just basically be like a low end kind of guy who you're like, all right, I'm just starting you and I'm not worried about it.
I like Jared Cook this week too. And yes, you're right on par with Denver. Denver has allowed a passer rating of 129 when targeting tight ends this year. I know it's a small sample size. We're only 3 games in, but Jared Cook is seeing targets. And as you mentioned, Michael Crabtree is a little dinged up. He's going to match up with Aqib Talib a lot. Benny Fowler. By the way, I wanted to mention this. I totally skipped over it since we're in the Denver Oakland game there. Benny Fowler and Emmanuel Sanders have combined for 8 red zone targets. Demaryius Thomas has 1. Like, what is going on here? Like, I mean, Demaryius Thomas has turned into like a 40-year-old wide receiver that it's like you could lock him in for 60, 70 yards a game. He'll score a touchdown like once every 5 games. Like, what has happened to Demaryius Thomas?
I don't know, man. I don't know either. I mean, I'm not really overly concerned, and I am particularly expecting the breakout performance this week, personally, against Oakland. But I agree. And as somebody who I didn't target Emmanuel Sanders. He certainly wasn't a guy who I expected to have a big year, but I love owning him. I mean, he's getting he's getting 12 targets a game and he is catching them. And Thomas is just kind of the odd man out. I expect that to change going forward, but I agree. Right now, if you're a Thomas owner, you have every right to be frustrated.
Definitely. Now, Charles Clay is someone that I do like versus Atlanta this week. It's a game that you kind of figure that Atlanta, they're going to put up points in their dome. That's just what they do. And Charles Clay so far this year, I mean, he has a team high 18 targets, and it doesn't sound all that crazy because, we've just talked about Martellus Bennett, who's got 21, but 23% target share because they're not throwing the ball a lot. They're averaging, I think it's like 26 pass attempts per game. So to see him have 18 targets is kind of ridiculous. The Falcons on 32 targets to the tight end position so far this year, they've allowed 16 catches for 156 yards, though no touchdowns. He's in that tight end one conversation. I also think Cameron Brate is someone that you guys can consider this week. The Giants, it's seemingly every week. It's just like clockwork. He's actually playing less snaps than rookie O.J. Howard, but at the same time, Cameron Brate is the one running most pass routes. So if I'm going to bet on one of them, it's probably him. And what do you think about Coby Fleener going into not going into Miami? And by the way, thank you for all of you for calling me out on that last podcast. I said something about Jay Cutler at home against the Saints, and everybody's like, Mike, this game is in London. I'm like, yeah, I wrote the game up after we had the waiver wire podcast, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to hear about this one. And of course, you guys let me know. So I appreciate you guys letting me know that. But what do you think about Coby Fleener in London, with Willie Snead back in the offense?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Willie Snead factor is the biggest one because except for last game, Fleener had basically excelled in the games that Willie Snead had missed. I think he missed one last year, and he had obviously missed the first two this year, and I think Fleener had scored a touchdown in all of them. Last week, though, again, this is what it is. The idea that Coby Fleener is suddenly going to be this amazing, reliable tight end, nobody is outside of maybe the top couple. You know what I mean? It's just you're going to have weeks where they're going to do nothing. We talked about Willie Snead earlier. I have no idea what to expect from him in this game. I have no idea how many snaps he's going to see. I don't know if he's going to see the whole game. Miami just isn't great against tight end, as you kind of saw with the only productive game of Hunter Henry's season this year. You know what I mean? It came against Miami. So for me, he slots in behind Cook and behind Clay this week, but I don't know. He's like a low end tight end one. Honestly, when I look at my tight end rankings, I just kind of want to vomit because they're all kind of the same, and I'm like, I don't really trust you. I don't really trust you. I don't really trust you.
Like I said, a touchdown. They get the touchdown. They're tight end one, and it's like that's frustrating because it's the hardest thing in the world is to predict touchdowns. That's why we chase the targets, and that's typically you want one. And when you're projecting a high scoring game, maybe you have an elite quarterback like someone like Martellus Bennett. That's why Jack Doyle is going to have value when Andrew Luck comes back. That's why we chase these offenses like that. Another guy I'll mention before we get out of here is Eric Ebron. Last year, nobody seems to know. He played in 15 games. There was just one game where he scored fewer than 8 PPR points. He's already done that twice this year. I think it's kind of like a weird thing. I don't think it's been intentionally on the Lions' part. So they're going into Minnesota. They're going to be playing Marvin Jones is going to see a lot of Xavier Rhodes. Trey Waynes has been playing decent football. Terrence Newman. So they have the cornerbacks there. It's their linebacking core is where they've really been lacking against the tight end position. So I think Eric Ebron can get back into that tight end one conversation. But Dan, is there anything you wanted to say before we get out of here for about week 4? Any hot takes? Any bold predictions you have?
Oh man, I'm writing right after we get off of this. I'm writing the start sit column. So I was just about to look at it. I think if you're going to put me on the spot and I'm going to give a hot take, I don't know if this is really a hot take, frankly, because I haven't checked these here, but I'd say that Chris Carson is going to be a top 10 running back this week. I assume that's a hot take because that sounds ridiculous as it comes out of my mouth, but I'm going to put it out there to say that this is the week at home. I think it's Sunday Night Football. Chris Carson's going to be an RB top 10 running back this week. It's a game that I think Seattle kind of Doug Baldwin sounds like he's going to play. I think the whole Seattle offense kind of gets right this week and puts on a show.
Yeah, I actually love that call. I in my primer, actually, I wrote up that game today, and I have Chris Carson. I said that he's an RB2 in your lineup for sure with RB1 potential written all over him. I think mine would be that Joe Mixon finishes the top 5 running back. That Joe Mixon's his coming out party is this week. You want him in your lineups. I think everybody knows that. That's why we didn't talk about him on the show. But no, thank you guys, as always, for tuning in. We do appreciate all the support on the show. If you guys have any questions, try and hit us up on Twitter. Dan, what's your Twitter handle?
It's Dan Harris 80.
I knew it had an 8 in it, and I'm like, I'm gonna screw this up, aren't I? Yeah. But no, later in the week, I try and get to some Twitter questions, up through Friday. It's really tough for me, but I'm at Mike Tagliere NFL, or go at FantasyPros. Bother Andrew. Andrew needs to be bothered more. Let him know your questions, guys. We'll get to them. Thank you to the sponsors of today's show, bombfell.com/FantasyPros. Remember, guys, check them out. That's like, it is such an amazing site that I had no idea about, but I checked them out, and it was phenomenal. I was really treated like top notch. So I really appreciate that. PristineAuction.com. Let them know Fantasy Pros sent you. Thank you. We will see you tomorrow for the DFS show. We got an awesome guest for you guys. I don't want to spoil the surprise, but it's going to be a fun time. Until then, guys, lights out.
I just wanted you to watch me dissolve.